Yeah, hello everyone, thanks for coming down. I also, like many, had to brave first request to get here, so finally made it. And yeah, I want to talk a bit about what I've titled The New Era of JavaScript, which is a really kind of vague, deliberately vague title, so I can change my mind on what to talk about at the last minute. It's effectively a kind of really high overview of what's going on at the moment, hopefully to kind of get you a bit motivated and excited to go and play with some of the new stuff like I am at the moment. So it should fit in quite nicely after Tom's really in-depth code talk, which was really interesting. This will be a bit more overview, hand-wavy, and metaphor-y. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. So my name is Jack Franklin. That's me on Twitter. I write lots of stuff on JavaScriptPlaying.com, JavaScript tutorials, all that. So if any of this is interesting, you'll find out more about myself and what I do and all the other tutorials and books and things. JavaScriptPlaying.com is basically 30 seconds about me. I'm an undergraduate. My final year at the University of Bath. It's like the Bristol Uni, but just a little bit better. I do believe JavaScript to be a proper language, so we'll see how it goes. So right now, I think JavaScript is a bit like when you get a massive Lego toy for Christmas. I don't know if anyone else did this, but this was a standard Christmas birthday present for me, was some form of Lego toy. I don't have them for them, unfortunately. My parents were quite cheap, so they didn't get me the Lego. They went the Lego blocks, which is like Lego, but not quite as cool. Anyway, so I got these massive Lego-like things, and it's really daunting when you open it. And what my mum would do when I had a Lego toy was she'd bring in about 10 bowls from the kitchen, and I'd take all the individual bags and I'd pour them into a bowl, and I'd be sat at the kitchen table all day, surrounded by bowls of Lego with little bits in. And JavaScript's a bit like this. We have lots of bowls full of lots of Lego that are all lots of little things. There are new libraries, tools, techniques, APIs, and so on. But until you really open that manual, you know, the manual on how to build the thing and get going, you've really no idea what's going on. So it's very exciting, but you're also completely clueless. And I think, through no fault of their own, a lot of people are like this with JavaScript at the moment, not because they're idiots, I mean not, but so much has just happened in the last year, 2 years, things have changed an awful amount. So hopefully today I will be your Millennium Falcon manual through the world of JavaScript. We'll count the metaphors, there's quite a lot. So here's another one. So at the moment we've got like this toolbox, but it's kind of messy and there's all sorts of different tools to do different things, and it's all about knowing the best tool for the best job. So really I'll go through a lot of different things in the rest of this talk, and then the hope is you can go off any particular bits that pique your interest, go and have a Google, or I can post links or point you in the right direction, so just come talk to me. Let's do a bit of a history lesson first. Anyone heard of this? Yeah, people might have used it. It's alright. So this is like jQuery, which I presume most of us have heard about by now. Came out at the end, early 2006, I think, 2006, 2007. John Isaac initially built it. He now doesn't do anything. It's run by a lot of people. What it basically did was it lowered the barrier to entry for JavaScript. Previously to jQuery, we had to mess around with the DOM, which is a horrible API. And all the cross-browser inconsistencies of Internet Explorer, all the different browser types. Even today, in the IE, so jQuery 1.9, which still supports IE 6, 7, 8, there are more hacks in there for WebKit than there are for IE. So we all hate on IE, which is great, but there are just as many kind of hacks and fixes for WebKit as there are. So it's not all Microsoft, just mostly. But so we did jQuery for a bit and we liked that, but all we built was bloody image carousels. That's yeah, we're getting there. So I hate image carousels. I hate these ones as well. They're too much fun for me. But generally, I hate image carousels and when we click to zoom through lots of images. And I built one. We're all guilty of building loads of them. Really, we didn't really do much more with jQuery and JavaScript than that. We just built accordions and image carousels, and what else did we build? Modal windows, lightboxes, they were good. All that kind of stuff. And really, in the last couple of years, we've actually started to realize that this JavaScript could do something more, and there's a lot more potential there. So, has anyone heard of Backbone? Well, a few nods. So, I'm not going to talk particularly about Backbone in any great detail, other than the first commit is quite interesting. It's September 30th, 2010. This is the first commit I could find on GitHub. So we're talking 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, that Backbone started existing as a thing. And I think this was really, 2010, 2011 was when we started seeing these new tools emerge. Browsers were getting more powerful, we were getting access to a lot of very nice newer APIs we didn't have. So it was time to realise that really we could do a lot more in the browser. And things like Backbone came along, and they're growing all the time at the moment that really made this possible. So really our talk expanded into a massive, messy workshop full of all bits and bobs. But really in the last year or so, 6 months to a year, the metaphor has matured. And really I feel it's at the point now, I'm really sorry about that. I feel now it's at the point where it's really a really good time to grab it. Previously, you could pick up a library, it would be changing every week. There'd be new APIs out, new things would happen, and it was quite difficult to pick something up and stick with it because it would change a lot of the time. But really, very recently, a lot of the prevalent frameworks and tools have hit version 1 or a stable new version where the API is almost locked down and it's not going to change every week. So really, it's a really nice time to go and have a play with some of these things. You might put off, you might do more of them, because they're kind of a lot more user-friendly now than they were. And as things rapidly develop, once they slow down, the documentation can catch up. In a lot of cases, it doesn't matter how good your library is, if your documentation is rubbish, and there are a few that are guilty of that, which now aren't quite so good. So, that's where we are today. I want to talk about this nice differentiation we all make between websites and web apps. We kind of ban these terms around, and no one seems to really know what they mean or what the differentiation between a website and a web app is. Who would say they build websites? One person, 2 people, 3 people. Who would say they build web apps? Lots more people. So I'm intrigued to know why, because I can't come up with a good definition that separates these two, and a lot of other people can't. I personally think that they're much of a muchness, and really Jeremy Keith, again, the URL's messed up, but the slides are online, so you can go and find that. It says, why do you want to make that distinction? What benefit do you gain by arbitrarily dividing the entire web into 2 classes? And I'm totally on his side with this. I think often you talk about websites and web apps, and really they're the same thing. And I'm going to do one of the worst things in the world to do. I'm going to quote myself from a previous talk. So this is what I said. I know, but I was going to just copy and paste the slide, and I just quote. So we'll build websites, people visit, do something, and leave. Differentiating is no good to anyone. And I still fully believe this. And the reason why I believe this, I'm going to quote myself again, is a lot of people ignore new JavaScript tools, methods, and approaches because they are just for web apps. Yeah, that's it. No more quoting myself. It's all gone. But yeah, I really do feel this quite strongly. Often people are too quick to discredit themselves these days and hence don't want to use something. A new library will pop up on Hacker News or Twitter or whichever medium you prefer. And you'd be like, oh, well, that looks too complex for me, or that wouldn't be useful for me. And really, I'm here to say that throughout the rest of this talk, I talk about loads of tools and things that are going on that are really exciting. Some of them may well not be relevant to what you do day to day, and that's fine. I'm not expecting you to use all of them and go home and tomorrow at work rebuild your entire website using all this new stuff. But I'm hoping that at the very least 1 or 2 bits will kind of pique your interest and be something you can go and apply. So don't basically give me a chance to convince you. Don't discredit yourself too quickly. Even the most basic of websites can still benefit from a little bit of tooling and some of these new stuff. So it's really about embracing the ecosystem. There is a massive ecosystem of JavaScript tools, which 2 years ago we didn't really have. As we start doing more with JavaScript, including things like Node, like we saw earlier with running JavaScript on the server, a lot more tools have become available to us. We're in a much better place than we were a few years ago. That said, it's not an all or nothing approach, so please take that in mind. I'm not going to try and convince you to use all of this tomorrow, but maybe over time you can have a look at it or pick 1 or 2 things. So, I'm lazy. It's not just because I'm a student. I'm also just generally lazy. And I think as a developer, being the right kind of lazy is a really good attribute to have. I'm talking about the kind of lazy that when you have to put your website online, and to do it you have to drop and drag files over an FTP client, you have to run some massive command line script, you have to do some copying and pasting, you have to do some minification, you have to copy and then paste and then rename files and all sorts. That sucks, and I'm sure I would be confident everyone in their workflow of putting a website online or building it or working on a website every day would be able to find something that they think is a bit slow and that they could optimize and that they'd really like some time to kind of sit down and rework. I can see a few nods, a few guilty looks. But I'm a big fan of really automating as much as we possibly can. Because else it's really easy to get stuck doing all the boring bits. And it just, for me anyway, it kills my enthusiasm for a project if I've got to spend 10 minutes putting it online, or 10 minutes setting it up, or 10 minutes doing this. And actually, I want to just leave that boring stuff things like compiling Sass or less or any of those CSS preprocessors or any of the JavaScript preprocessors, minifying your code before you put it live, running your tests, running your code against something like JS Hint to check that you haven't made any silly mistakes. Any of that stuff, I can do all that using my workflow using a tool called Run, which we'll get onto in a bit, in kind of seconds, a second or two max. Before, I was doing it manually by going and running these tools individually, and it would take kind of a few minutes. It's just rubbish. So a lot of this stuff going on from here is talking about how you can kind of get rid of the boring stuff and allow you as a developer to do the best bit, which is the exciting problems, not how to minify your CSS. So the first thing I want to talk about is templates. This is something that I don't think enough people use. So a lot of us, right, show of hands, write some form of JavaScript that manipulates some HTML or creates some HTML. Yeah, most people. Who uses some form of templating? Most people. That's the wrong answer. Some people don't. So clearly I'm behind the times. I gave this talk in September and no one put their hand up at the second question. It was brilliant. There you go. So templating, as you all know, templating is a really nice way of avoiding having to mess around with HTML and manipulating it directly. What you do is you define templates, and in those templates you have some form of syntax, depending on the language, for specifying kind of variables within your template. Then when you render that, you grab the template, you pass in an object with the data within it, and it will spit out HTML with those placeholders in your template replaced with the actual values based on what you passed in. So it's a really nice way of separating out your HTML and your JavaScript. We've all done the thing where to insert some HTML using jQuery or just JavaScript, we have a massive string of HTML, and then you might have quotes and then a plus because you've got a variable in, and another plus and a quote, and then you've got to remember that you need a space outside the quotes so you don't end up with the variable squashed. That's rubbish. We've all done it, and also what that does is it intrinsically links your JavaScript and your HTML together. They're really tightly coupled. That's a bad thing. We like decoupling and things not being kind of tied together. And then if you can have your JavaScript just pick up a template and render that, you've separated the concerns really well. So templates, clearly you guys don't need convincing, templates are a massive win. I have no idea what this picture is, by the way. It was the first thing on Flickr for templates. It wasn't rubbish. I don't know. If anyone happens to know, the picture isn't too clear. If anyone happens to know, then that'd be great.
Is it both? I think it's both, is it?
Is it both? I don't really know. My screen's looking a bit orange. Oh, I've got flux on, isn't it? Yeah. Let's do a quick detour. Oh, no. Oh. No, I'm going to blind you all. Yeah. I'm working on that one now. Yeah, I don't. No, I mean the links on Flickr, everyone does know. Anyway, so this is just kind of Google various templating libraries. Untitled.js, really nice JavaScript utility library, does lots of stuff, has templating built into it. Personally, I'm a big fan of Handlebars, my go-to templating engine of choice. A lot of other libraries we'll see in a bit also use Handlebars. Mustache is kind of, Handlebars was built on top of Mustache, and Mustache is kind of a simpler version. Any Ruby people in the house? I know it's a JavaScript one. Yes. EJS is very similar to ERB, embedded Ruby templates. If you use Ruby a lot, you might have EJS that you can pick up. J tends to use a lot with Node on the back end, and Hogan is Twitter's templating. As always, instead of just using one of these and contributing to it, people just make more of them. So, okay. But choice is good, right? So testing. I don't know if it's because I do a lot of Ruby as well as JavaScript, but I'm massive on testing and test-driven development and all this stuff. Who does this regularly? Don't all put your hands up, probably that. Okay, that's good. That's better. That's a good ratio. So testing is great, and in particular, it's great that you can have confidence. If you build up a full test suite, what you can do is you can run that, and kind of in a few seconds later, you can know if anything is broken immediately, and that's great. It's brilliant and really shines when, say, you've got a massive JavaScript app that runs on Node, and Node gets updated. All you have to do to make sure your tests work, you upgrade Node, and then you run the test on that new version of Node, and you know in a split second if anything's gone wrong. Stuff like that, preventing regression bugs. So we've all done it. You implement a new feature, you click around in your app, you make sure that feature works. Unknowingly, you've broken a feature you invented 6 months ago, but you don't think to test that because why would you? So testing really comes into its own there as well. And it hasn't really got hold in JavaScript yet. There are a lot of good libraries for doing it, and it is really good. I really like it, but not everyone has done it yet. So I'm a big fan of testing too, and really the competence that gives you. And I think I've managed to mix up my slides, so we'll go back a minute. So these are my preferred testing frameworks of choice. Jasmine is very much like RSpec, if anyone's used that Ruby-wise. QUnit is the test suite that jQuery is tested in. QUnit is very much set up towards testing domination and manipulations. So things like if you are writing a jQuery carousel, if you have to, then I've used QUnit in the past to test those because QUnit does really well with setting up kind of HTML for your tests, your test code to edit and then check the results of that. And Mocha is another really good one, particularly in Node. Yeah, I mixed up my slides, so I'll do that bit. So, who's heard of Grunt? Some of you, that's alright. I always fear you're all going to do that, and we might as well finish now. But so Grunt.js is it's a JavaScript task runner, and the idea behind Grunt is it is a way to automate all the stuff I've just talked about. So you basically, Grunt has a lot of plugins which run tasks. So for example, there is a Jasmine plugin which will run your Jasmine tests. There is a plugin for compiling handlebars templates. There is a plugin for minifying CoffeeScript, minifying less, minifying SCSS, minifying and compiling all that stuff. There are plugins for just about everything you could imagine. And what it does is you define all these tasks, which are these plugins, but then you can have build processes which are all these tasks combined. So you can create a new step which will run JS hints, it will then run your tests, it will then minify some stuff, it will then compile some stuff, it will do this and that. So basically that should run one command and have your entire build process automated for you. So really this is the backbone of everything that I do in terms of JavaScript. I really would encourage you to go and check it out if some of this tooling stuff is appealing to you. I think you'll find Grunt really nice. It's fairly simple setup, it runs on Node, how to do most things these days. Really good support for Windows as well, so it's certainly not Linux only. Node generally actually has really good Windows support, which is quite impressive. So it's all good, and Grunt in as well. So I really would encourage you to go and have a look at Grunt. So, the burning issue of the day at the moment is where to do development when we're building these web apps on the client with JavaScript frameworks like Backbone, so earlier, or even just some simple jQuery, or on the server. And the answer, as with every tech question ever, is it depends. Anyway, I'm done, so that's good to know. I do have an answer, but it really does depend completely on your circumstances. There are obviously going to be some cases where you need to work on the server. Obviously going to be some cases where actually it's better to bring it client side. The general argument against client side is JavaScript can be turned off by users. So, if a user visits your site and there's no JavaScript, they'll just see nothing. And also, depending on what you're doing, it can be fairly intensive to run all this stuff on the front end. Moving all the processes of calculations, all that logic from the server to the client can have performance problems. However, recently, in particular, browsers and kind of the newer version of browsers that are coming out now, even the latest Internet Explorer, are really, really powerful, and people are to harness this kind of runtime that we have in that Google Chrome can run on Windows, can run on Mac, can run on everything, and it's really fast JavaScript engine. The V8 engine is pretty incredible, and so really there is a lot of call for things to move onto the client. So what I'd like to do from here is talk a bit more about this and show you a couple of examples of apps that have been built on the client side. One I built, one that someone much cleverer than me built, just to kind of show you the pros and cons. This is as you can imagine, highly debated subject. A lot of people have written a lot of things on it. Of course, the Twitter debates rage every day about it, which is good. Twitter's great. But really, I'm with this guy, a guy called Todd Motto, who's a developer who was interviewed on this URL. He said, don't turn off the native language and expect things to work. And I think people are buying into that. I think it's very rare that people do turn off JavaScript now. I know we have a few people. I think GDS, the guys who are on gov.uk, did some analysis recently, and they found, I think it was 1.1%. It's around 1% weren't getting JavaScript. So we're talking low numbers, but obviously 1% of GDS's figures, which is kind of millions, is still a lot of people. But depending on your audience, your apps, I think the time has come now to start looking at when we can take things onto the client with JavaScript, because this JavaScript stuff isn't going away. This tooling and all these libraries and all the massive libraries springing up in GitHub, they're not going anywhere. these libraries like Backbone and jQuery, they've existed for years. They're not going to. It's not like these things came out next month and they're still in early alpha. They're established now. A lot of these tools are established. So I think we can start to really push them a bit more and really get behind them. So who's heard of Ember.js? Quite a lot of people. Cool. So Ember.js is one of these frameworks for building complex, large client-side applications. It kind of comes with support for models and controllers and views using handlebars. All these stuff that you would typically expect to find in a server-side framework like Ruby on Rails or the PHP ones like Laravel or any of the others, Ember kind of brings to the client. I just want to talk about a kind of example. Has anyone happened to have seen bustle.com? Which I think it's a big American site, but this is the first site I know of which is built entirely on Ember.js. It's actually, if we want such bad internet, it's actually really quite impressive to go and browse around this and have a look at it because it is really quick. You can't quite see it, but when I took this screenshot a couple of months ago, the article down here was titled "The Cognitive Dissonance of Miley Cyrus." So I didn't read it. Bustle is a full Ember app, and I really like it, and I hope this will work. This is a little video of kind of me. So I just refreshed the page there. This is slowly in fresh, and I mean, they've got some weird articles, but you can't quite make out, hopefully you can see a bit, but it is really quick, like really, really quick, particularly when you're clicking yourself and not just watching kind of a video. All this stuff is fairly instant, and it's genuinely really quite impressive to see this happening. So that's bustle.com. So I would go and have a look at that. Some of the articles are a bit odd. You can write about cognitive dissonance of Miley Cyrus, but it is really cool. And what I love as well is you can dive into the source code. Now by default, that's not too useful. You can look at the source of this massive Ember app and might understand it. But there is also a Chrome extension for Ember.js, which adds it to the Chrome DevTools. So what you can do then is you can click on that and you can dive right into the application. You can look at the models they define, the controls they define, the views they define. So it's actually really interesting. You know, you come across these complex server-side apps, you just have to kind of guess how they work, or maybe they might put some code on GitHub. But with this, you can see absolutely everything, which I find really exciting, and I like the idea that any massive client-side app we can just go and grab and hack around and have a play in. Obviously, with the DevTools, it's fairly easy to just try changing the JavaScript and see what happens, because it will kind of build it live in the page view. The great thing about Bustle, though, is it works without JavaScript too. So it's not kind of an all or nothing approach. Yes, there is extra work to be done, making it work without JavaScript if you build with Ember, of course. But basically, when they detect that no JavaScript is enabled, they effectively just kind of hit articles, send stuff back from the server, and turn off all their Ember stuff. So you get a little red warning, and it does work better with JavaScript. But all these things are still clickable. They'll load a new page. It's a little slower because obviously it's hitting your server now, bringing stuff back. But it is happening. So it's not like Bustle can't be used if I haven't got JavaScript. It works, and you can get at the content just as well. It's just not quite as pretty. I think really Bustle has been kind of flogged quite a lot for being really cool and great. You know, the Ember folks use it a lot as kind of a case study in what can be done with it. But I think really they should be touting this side even more. That it's really not, it's not all or nothing, and without JavaScript you can still throw the content down the line. So that's a really complicated example. I want to talk now about a little example I made. I don't know if anyone happened to see this thing called SkillSwap, which I launched a couple of 2-3 months ago with a friend of mine called Ben Howell. And what this was, I do this all the time on Twitter, is I go and try and find people to help with a problem. So I'll tweet, I'm having a Ruby problem, who can help? And now and then people get back to me, now and then people will ignore me. But we built a really simple site for allowing those conversations to exist. So I go on here and I say what, so if you sign in, there's a form and you can add what you need help in. So I say, so this guy, for example, whoever that is, say they're looking for help with English, and in return they can offer their help with JavaScript. So the idea is it's swapping skills. So I say, right, I'm quite good with JavaScript. I'll help you with JavaScript or something else, and in return I'd really like a bit of help with Ruby. And then people from here offer your help, opens up Twitter, you send a tweet to someone saying, I saw you on SkillSwap, would like to help, blah, blah, blah. And then from there you take it and you talk on Skype. And I've actually done that. I've chatted with a couple of people on Skype. I've helped them with some JavaScript. They've helped me with various other things that I have no idea about. And other people have too, so it's really cool to see this. When we built this first, it was a Ruby app. It runs Sinatra, it's a little Ruby framework, sign up with Twitter, and then you just submit a form and it refreshes under that. But what I decided to do as a learning exercise more than anything else was build it with Ember. And the result actually is really cool. I div around here, I don't know why, but just watch how kind of instant it feels when I hit save, because what Ember does is it updates the DOM immediately whilst the AJAX request to the server is still going. Because, we're highly confident that that AJAX request will go through. So I hit save, and it kind of pops up instantly. You can do searching really quickly. I piss around with the checkbox for some other reason. But, and it's really nice. The way, kind of when you hit save, some design flaws, when you hit save, and it immediately loads it in, it's really nice. It's kind of hard to convey on this kind of screen share, but it's a really nice way of doing things. It just feels really quick. I think, this is a very basic application. We can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. If you do want to go look at Ember, which I would recommend, Ember is different, like really different. It's a completely different way of building applications. If anyone's played with Backbone, Angular, any of those, they're all quite different. Ember is just really different. It's like a really new way of thinking. What they do is they really are massively keen on maintaining URLs. So one thing that a lot of Backbone apps or similar do is URLs are just broken. You click around the page, you refresh, and you end up back where you started. You end up where you were 3 clicks ago, because they don't maintain the URL state. That's because whilst Backbone is great, I'm a massive fan of it, it doesn't do any of that stuff for you. You have to build it yourself. A lot of people don't bother. A lot of tutorials for things like Backbone don't ever talk about URLs. Ember takes the opposite approach. That the URL kind of is key to the web. It's key to how we share stuff. Without the URL, we've really got nothing. So Ember is a lot more complex and fully featured than Backbone because it does a lot for you. One of those things is routing. So URLs just work out of the box. So a lot of the things in Backbone you have to spend a lot of time dealing with, you don't have to in Ember. But it is very different. We're talking about routers and models and templating and data binding and controllers. Really different stuff. It will take a while for you to get your head around. They work a lot like kind of Ruby on Rails framework does, and it's convention over configuration. So when you name things, like you name controllers, you name routes, you name models, you have to name them in a specific way, because then Ember will pick them up and do things with them to make them work properly. So you kind of just as a word of warning, it's different. I took a long time to get my head around it, finally did, and I'm a massive fan now. Really, really like it. It is different. As a plug, SkillSwap is all publicly available on GitHub. There's a link down the bottom if you grab the slides. And there is the RP stuff, is the Ruby backend. But if you go to public, you'll find the JavaScript file. And we're literally talking, I think it's about 80 lines of JavaScript to build the SkillSwap front end. So it's not like I'm running thousands of lines of code either. And you can look as well at how I do the back end and how Ember talks to kind of back end through AJAX requests as well, if you'd like. But of course, sometimes this might not be a great solution. Going back to the GDS guys, if they built GovUK and an Ember app, you imagine what would have happened there. It wouldn't have gone down too well. They just need to get the information over. GovUK isn't an exciting website. You go to it, you grab stuff, and you leave again. What they've done so well is made that really easy to do. But for apps, particularly, we have, as developers, have a lot of side projects. Who has a side project of some sort, or lots, less than I was expecting. We all should have some form. I've got like 29 unfinished ones. These are a great time to play around with a new thing, and particularly something that's developer focused. Using something like Ember or Backbone or your JavaScript library of choice isn't going to be a big deal. At the end of the day, I think this is a quote from the Todd Motto interview. Not from me. Sacrificing functionality to the majority of your audience in case of the minority is madness. I really truly believe that we do need to do that, and we do need to start pushing hard to kind of, making JavaScript not optional, doing this really cool stuff to show the benefit, because there are a lot of benefits. I'm not here to tell you to do that. It's certainly on an app-by-app or side-by-side basis. But we're not going to go away anytime soon. Us mad JavaScripters and our improper language. So don't build it just because we can, because that's silly. It's not going to help anyone. But if you do get a chance, I really would encourage you to go and have a play with them. Or at least go and have a play with all the new stuff like Grum and the templating engines, all this stuff, because it can save you time. It's a really, hopefully I can kind of convey, it's a really exciting time to be doing JavaScript on the web, even not on the web, even with Node. So I hack my command line quite a lot to do a lot of things. I've written loads of scripts in Node.js that do little utilities for me. Because now instead of writing horrible shell scripts and bash syntax, which let's face it, no one understands, I can write it in JavaScript, which is even better. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on. I mentioned quite a lot. The slides are online. Feel free to go through them and kind of Google things, click on things. Any questions now? I'm happy to take them. I think everyone might be spending the food. But if you have questions in the future, you're more than welcome to ping me on the internet, and I will try to get back to you. Else, I'll shut up. Any questions? Yes.
When it comes to protecting, like, you know, business critical kind of logic and stuff, and if you put that all on the front end, do you have a strategy for protecting stuff that, you know...
As in keeping it hidden? No.
It's interesting, I mean, as a backend developer, I'm principally a backend developer. Shifting it more towards the client is, of course, what you want to do. But there is a point where it's like you're giving too much away.
Yeah. I think people have tried various methods in the past of protecting source code. I know there was one website where I think I wanted to inspect something and I right-clicked and it told me I couldn't right-click. There are clearly ways around that. I think if you do try some way, I think it's always going to be circumvented, fairly straightforward. If there's stuff like that is, you know, that key to your app and so important that, you know, your competitors can't get hold of it, whatever it is, then really you haven't really got any massive option else to move it to the server.
Sure.
And probably serve an AJAX endpoint, so you ping the server and get the data back. So you leave the logic in the way, and you just ping the server for the result.
That's right.
No, I want to be really clear if I don't. Yeah, so okay. So I guess me. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, I'm around Twitter, whatever, if you have any further questions.
So